All right. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Kuldeep Singh, and I will be your host today for this 45-minute tightly scheduled webinar. We would be discussing about business process automation using Microsoft Power Platform's great component, a service, Power Automate. So let's get started. When we talk about the webinar, we are about to begin. So first of all, I thank you very much, everybody, for joining us, whether you're joined us from the Zoom meeting or you're viewing us on any of the live media streaming channels. So thanks a lot. Thank you very much for joining us for today's webinar. On behalf of us here and the entire team, I welcome you on board. So without any further ado, let's get started with our webinar. So let's quickly discuss in terms of what we would be covering as part of agenda when we will be talking about this particular webinar. So in today's session, we would be discussing the overview of Microsoft Power Automate, what Power Automate is, what it can do. Previously, it was known as Microsoft Flow, then further rebranded into Power Automate in there. We will be discussing some of the top level concepts which will help you building your beginner to intermediate level skills in terms of Power Automate structures. How does it start working and how we can start associating those details in there. At the same point of time, we would be discussing a quick demonstration where we would be creating a practically running Power Automate example based on some business scenarios, some quick to use business scenarios down there. And we will be having a Q&A depending on how much time we'll be getting on this tightly scheduled webinar over here. We'll be addressing the questions at the end of the session. So thank you very much. Let's get started with our Power Automate section in here. So when you talk about Power Automate, it is first of all one of the major pillars when you talk about the Microsoft Power Platform structure. So there are four major sections there. You have Microsoft Power Automate, you have Microsoft Power Apps, you have Microsoft Power Virtual Agents, and you have Microsoft Power BI for enhanced visualizations, dashboards, and reportings. So we are talking about one of an important pillar, which is Microsoft Power Automate. Previously, Microsoft used to call that service as MS Flow 2.5 years down the line, and then rebranded itself into Microsoft Power Automate component. So what can you expect from Power Automate ideally? So if you want to have a business integration, if you want to integrate your Power Automate sections down there, we can always do that with the help of Microsoft Power Automate, any kind of business integration scenarios. So it's simple. Some of the great use cases when you talk about any kind of automation and integration scenarios, we talk about automating a business process. Well, depending on the use cases, it could be your marketing process automation, your sales process automation, your RPAs, robotic process automation. You might want to talk about your order processing from the ERP system, or you have some third-party services. You want to have some trigger-based commands and would like to perform some further actions for Microsoft Power Automate. It can send automatic reminders for your past due task. So whatever you have, some of these examples, a great use case in here. You can move your business data from based on systems on a specific schedule or on a specific trigger down the line. We can use it for data import export kind of situations as well, where something gets triggered and I want to move my business data from one system to another altogether. They could be Microsoft services, unknown Microsoft services. So we have more than 390 plus connectors already in there. And on top of that, you guys can create custom connectors as well if required for any kind of integration and automation. You can connect 390 plus data sources which are already there. And of course, you have plenty of publicly available APIs as well, which can be consumed and utilized within Microsoft Power Platform, Power Automate structures. You can even automate your tasks on your local computer, for example, computing data in Excel and all those things. And you can also have RPA achieved, robotic process automations, with the help of Microsoft Power Automate. So it's a great tool when we talk about the usage and the use cases. Now let's take an example, what different type of Power Automate flows we do have available with us and how we can start working with them. Having said that, when I talk about the type of flows being available, I have automated flows. So the automated flows, as the name suggests, Power Automate flows over there, which are automated in nature, running based on a trigger. We can have some instant flows, which we can quickly run from wherever we are, from our web applications, from our systems, a button push or anything like that. We can go on a scheduled flow as well. So if I have a business process which I am automating, I can schedule it up to run on a specific schedule. I can define the recurrence over there. All right. We can talk about the business process flows, which are a great example and tightly coupled with Microsoft Dynamics 365 customer engagement product, the CRM product line over there, which can help automating those business process flows in there. We can have the UI flows. If you have any kind of RPA workload over there, a robotic process automation, what needs to be achieved, we can start working and have the RPA flows created in there. So all in all, it's a great product to be used that comes up within your Office E35, so Office 365 or Microsoft 365 subscriptions, and people can start using it outrightly from day one. Having said that, when I talk about some of the top level concepts which we are discussing in here, what exactly our top level concepts are with Microsoft Power Automate. So we talk about connectors. We discuss about connections in there. We talk about triggers being available. We talk about different actions being available in Power Automate structures. We talk about Microsoft templates, which are already available, which can be utilized based on the needs whenever we want. So having said that, how does it actually work? Let's consider a connector is a service which we are talking about to be utilized in our automation process, or we would like to integrate it in one of our Power Automate flows down the line. So how does it eventually work when you talk about the connectors? Microsoft is having more than 390 plus connectors which are readily available. People can start working around in there, and we can have all these options created and configured when we are working about all these options down the line in there. So when I talk about the connections being available, that's the secondary part. If you want to integrate any service down there, how can we start associating and connecting to that particular API with the authenticated credentials? We will be discussing that. Every connector is having a situation. So you have a trigger and you have an action. A connector may have zero trigger, but may have n number of actions associated with that. This is my first case. This is quite possible. A connector may have n number of triggers over there and doesn't have any actions over there. This is also possible. But if I talk about a connector with zero triggers and zero connections, this is not a possible approach. You will not find any connector without any triggers or actions. We would be discussing about it a little bit later on our demonstration when I talk about connectors being available. At the same point of time, we have a very simple example on this PowerPoint picture over here on this image on this slide, which talks about when a record is created in any of your common data model, your business services. I want to run a UI desktop flow for any kind of RPA automation, which is doing providing the account level and all these details. We can add some conditions. What if a given condition is true or false? If it is true, I want to have send an email notification with all these options. Or if it is false, I would like to go with the next step, post a message to Slack or somewhere else. We can always design these automated business flows when we are working about Power Automate structures in there. At the same point of time, let's talk about the connectors in here. How does eventually the connector works? How can we start associating these details in there? So when I talk about options and any kind of further detailed things in there, so when I talk about the connectors being available, a connector is a service with the help of which we can communicate with that particular software or service industries or whatever that system's going to do. Having said that, how does it eventually work? As I told you, Microsoft's already having 390 plus connectors, which can be utilized in Power Automate. They can be utilized in Power Apps as well. They can be utilized in Azure Logic Apps if required. They can be utilized, which will provide you a way to connect to their services and invoke them in any of your business integration scenarios. You have standard or premium connectors in there. You do have some connectors which are in preview, some are ready to use in productions. You have Microsoft versus non-Microsoft service connectors in there, which can be utilized in there. You have connector for Power Apps, Power Automate, Logic Apps for Azure, for all these three different things in there. So let's take an example. When I talk about connectors, you are seeing very few options which we have copied from there. And these are the few options which are coming up as connectors in here. And which connector is having support for Logic Apps, Power Automate, or Power Apps. You have these icons available in here. They're supported with which of these particular products down the line. If I talk about some of the realistic examples in here, let's take an example, guys. I'm moving to a URL. So let me just go in there and I'm going to a URL for Power Automate. Let me just do that for, I'm just going to do that. Give me just a second here. And let me quickly go ahead and start working with this. So I'm moving to Power Automate. Let me go flow.microsoft.com, which is taking me to Microsoft Flow's website in there, where I can start configuring the Power Automate connections, the connectors, the triggers, the actions, all those things we can start associating over here. All right, it is working up. It's taking me in there. Now, let's take an example. Once we have these things over there, I would like to start working and then get those details configured. I want to create a small flow, but before I do that, I would like to start having these discussions on what eventually a connector is, how can we use a connector, how that can be utilized for various reasons. So if you take a look on my Power Automate portal here, I'm clicking on the connectors area, and now it is taking me to the list of all available connectors. So having said that, when I am working over here, you can see it's giving me some popular connectors. You have some premium connectors here, some standard connectors down the line. You have some Microsoft versus non-Microsoft, SQL Server, RSS, Power BI, RSS connectors, notifications, Gmail, Amazon Weather, GitHub, finance and operations, Act, or you see Oracle, Amazon Redshift, plenty of connectors which are available in here. And as I told you, these are 390 plus connectors as on today when we are delivering this particular webinar with various services. So some connectors are ready to use, some are in preview. So in preview versus production, some are premium, some are standard. On top of that, you have some connectors which are working with from the Microsoft services, Microsoft's being the publisher and provider. Some are non-Microsoft connectors in here. So we were discussing about them, okay? The second important segment is when we need to talk about the connections, how these things are, how does these things actually work? So when I talk about some of the good automation strategies which we can adapt and we can start working up in here is you might want to consider your marketing automation to be done with the help of Power Platform. You might want to consider various areas, and one of them is marketing automation. You might want to consider an automated order processing from your ERP system, which is taking care of your website order processing, XML serialization, all these processes into consideration. You might want to consider an automated data ingestion from various data sources and get it proposed, get it formatted, get it cleansed, get it loaded, and then get that formatted for having some more informed decisions out of that, data-driven decisions out of that. You can have automated data cleansings in there. You can talk about your sales automation for revenue generations in there. You can have some revenue recognition processes which your organization might want to automate. So there could be n number of situations and use cases where you might want to create your automation strategies around. Having said that, how does it work? So let's have a quick demonstration, guys, now, which will talk about how do we work with Microsoft Power Automate right from the scratch. What are the connectors? How does it work with connections? How do we create that integration of services down there? And eventually, how do we achieve any kind of simple scenarios over here? So this demonstration about creating your first Microsoft flow over here. And on top of that, how can we further automate that particular structure, but that particular flow? So let's take an example. I am taking you to my Power Automate portal over here. And I want to create some flows, some Power Automate automation flows over here. So when you click on the action items on your portal, it talks about you can have some approvals, business process flows, plenty of things in there. What we are more interested in right now is I'm clicking on my flow over here. So I'm creating a flow down the line. You will see I already have plenty of flows created connecting multiple different services, payment processing gateways, SharePoint, Microsoft Forms, all other services down the line in there. And you may have some desktop flows, some UI flows in there. You may have some business process flows over here if you're using some business applications which you are configuring in here. You can see some of the flows which were not created by you, but they are shared with you as part of the team. So I'm into my cloud flows area, and I want to create an automated cloud flow, an automated Power Automate flow over here. This is going to do some sort of actions down the line. Before I do that, let's take an example. I'm taking you to my SharePoint over here. So let me go to my SharePoint portal real quick, where I am currently connected to. And once it takes me in there, let me go to my testing site. I have a test site configured for SharePoint for any kind of demonstrations or all these things. You will see we've got some lists available in here. So if I take a look, I've got something called as expenses in here. And people have entered some expenses on this particular list. What I really want over here is that once anybody starts working around, once a new item has been inserted on SharePoint, it should go ahead and it should send an email directly over there. Well, no need to say that. I can achieve it with the help of SharePoint flows or workflows as well. But I want to do it with Power Automate, which can further do lots of other business integration scenarios down there. So let's take an example. I'm going to my Microsoft Power Automate. One of the service which I will be using here is SharePoint. The second service which I will be using here is to send an email, let's say Outlook Office 365. And we'll be doing that particular testing with some dynamic values. That's going to be our first demonstration. We will be having a little bit advanced demonstration following by that. So let me go ahead real quick in here. I want to create an automated cloud flow. The moment you do that, you have some famous triggers over here, which you can start working right from here. Well, what I want to do everything from scratch. I don't want to use any pre-existing templates. So let me click on skip. And the only thing why I'm doing it is to show you how easy is it to create some automation scenarios, achieve them without even writing a single line of code. So we are talking about absolutely 0 lines of code, and we are achieving some sort of automations with the help of Power Automate. All right. So let's go ahead in here. I'm talking about what do you want? So I'm looking for SharePoint being my first service. All right. Let me select Microsoft SharePoint over here. Now, no need to say that. I was talking about a connector. In this case, SharePoint is a connector, is having two areas to work with, the triggers and the actions. So a couple of things we want to discuss while I'm going through with this demonstration. It is absolutely required that my flow is starting with a trigger. Whenever that trigger happens, I want to do something. So it could be an HTTP trigger, it could be a timer trigger, it could be a SharePoint trigger, it could be my Salesforce trigger, it could be Oracle database trigger, it could be Dynamics 365, lots of services are there. In this example, I'm saying when a new item is created, all right? So the trigger is whenever an item is created, and then I need to specify, if you take a look here, it is currently connected with a connection, which it is authenticating that to which particular site this trigger is going to be configured. So let me go over here. When I do that, I click on the drop down, and that's going to show me all the sites, all the SharePoint sites which are available, and this connection has access to. So once I scroll it down, for example, I'm looking for my test site. In this particular test site, I've got some lists available, and there is an expenses list which we were discussing. So if there is a new item which gets created on this particular list, I want to do something. Let me click, and this is my trigger. So I have a trigger now that when this automated flow is going to be triggered, when this condition is true, when a new item is created on that SharePoint list. What do you want to do after that? You can do plenty of things. You can go for conditions, if else, switch case, for loop, recursions. You can go for AI builder models, desktop flows, other connectors in there. In my simplest possible example, I want to trigger an email when a new item gets created on SharePoint. So let me go in here, and I'm talking about Outlook, but it's not a regular Outlook. I'm talking about to use Outlook 365, Office 365 in that case. Let me use it and see. Before I select my action, it is also authenticating myself with my current logged in users as an authenticated user. It could be the different credentials altogether as and when required. So I'm going up. What I want to do, I want to send an email. So I'm looking for an action now. I want to send an email, or you can directly search. I'm talking about send email, and that's going to be send email version 2 with the updated details. Let me select it. And now you can see this connector is connected with this particular connection over here. It could be with various connections which I've already created, and we will be exploring them a little bit later after this demonstration. So I click on this particular area, which specifies to whom I want to send this connection. I can add some dynamic content as well, which we will be adding a little bit later on in the same demo. So I want to send it to one single person because that person wants to be notified when a new items added to the list. All right. What is going to be the subject? Let's say I'm talking about new expense entered with title, and I would like to put the title dynamically here from this dynamic list. These values are coming up from my previous step. When the new item gets created, these are the value of that current record. All right, let's take a look. I'm saying hello, and let me configure it. New expenses created with below details. All right. And I will deliberately make a mistake over here, and we will see the problem in the flow. And then I'll come back and we will be correcting that. We'll talk about the testing as well. So let's say, what is my expense title? So I'm looking for my expense title over here, and I'm selecting my title. I would like to have my description of the expense. So let me have it up in here. Now I want to go for what is my expense amount. So let me go for expense amount over here. I would like to go, what was my expense location? So I'm searching for that particular field. I'm selecting expense location over here. I'm looking for expense category here. And let me go for expense type or the expense category, or whatever, all these values. So I'm looking for my payment mode. So let's say this is my expense category value, and I'm looking for my payment mode over here. How did we make the payment? So I'm looking for payment mode. That's okay. And let's say I'm saying this is a notifications team, and this is what we are trying to send. Let me save it up once. So you see, it's quite a simple example. There is a trigger. When the trigger happens, we send an email. It's as simple as it can be. It is quite possible you may have plenty of steps down the line in there. So you can add them to run before that, or you can add. So for example, if I'm adding a new step here, this is my trigger, step 1 and step 2, step 3, step 4. I want to run them in sequential manner. That can also happen. If I want to run them on a parallel execution, you will simply click on that plus icon over here and you can have parallel executions of steps. All right. I want to rename it. And what I want to call it, since it is a demonstration, so let me go for my demo expense notification flow. That's what I created over here. Let me save it. And there is a great icon available in the service which talks about the flow checker. We can click on that flow checker to check if there are any problems, any potential errors or warnings with the flow. All right, it looks absolutely good without any problem. Let me take you back and explain some of the details about it. So when I'm in here, this was the flow. It's created by me on which particular date that is currently turned on. I can temporarily turn it off if I need to. It is an automated, talking about a per user plan. There are 0 executions. It is using 2 different connections from these connection services with different particular email addresses or the authenticated access. All right. I'm currently the owner of this particular flow. I want to test it out. Let's take an example, guys. I'm on this particular site and let me click on, I want to create a new entry over here. And I would like to call it, let's call it flight bookings and stay, whatever I want to call it. And I'm looking, this is going to be the amount. It's an international one. You can talk about the category. That's my hotel and stay. It does require an approval. My payment methods, ACH, and let me save it up. So I just created a new item into that list. Ideally, what's going to happen, my Power Automate flow will trigger and will get executed, and we will be able to monitor the progress as well. If I refresh it up over here, you will see the moment it comes up, you will see that execution kicks in. Whatever site we selected, whatever category we selected, this will trigger, my flow will get executed and we will see all these executions. So you can click on the run history. If there are some executions as of now, you can see that 40 milliseconds it took and that got succeeded. I can verify that, and then I will show you a little bit in detail how can you verify this output. So first thing first, when the receiver comes up, let me log into my personal email over here where I was supposed to receive an email. I did it twice because I have multiple flows, but this was the one which we were having. It's telling me new expense entered with this particular title. This was the title, description was nothing, amount was 560, and there is some problem. That's not user readable. That's not user friendly. The category is fine though. The payment mode is also great. So I can see that it is working, but that's not how it should be. So what I want to do, I want to make some changes to that. And deliberately, as I told you guys, I made this mistake so we can rectify that and see the potential reason behind it. So when I click on edit, I want to make some changes in terms of configuration. One of the best practices while you're editing it in the non-business hours, make sure you turn it off first. So it's not handling any running instances down there. And then you edit those changes. When I click over here, I was having the expense location. Well, I don't need that. Instead of that, I was having an expense location value. I just want to see the value, not the complete JSON or OData related details over there. Similar thing with my payment mode. I'm actually looking for the payment mode value instead of that old bigger string which we were seeing over there. Well, I made some changes. Let me save it up. Now, there are 2 ways to do that. One, you go to that, add one more entry, it will trigger it one more time, and that's how we do that. Or secondary options, I want to test it. So the moment you click on test, you want to test the functionality, and I want to test it manually or I want to test it automatically. When I say automatically, with our recently used triggers, it will show you all the executions. There was an execution just 2 minutes before. I want to use it to test this functionality again. So I'm not making a new entry to my data source. I'm just reusing a recent run. Let me click on test. And it's telling me my flow is running. and the flow is took estimatedly 0 second, 1 second it took to send an email. And you can see I already received one, the revised email, but this time it's giving me exactly the values what I was requiring. So that was one small example where I created this Power Automate flow. It is making some changes over there and delivering those particular changes as into the required format in here. If I go back in here, at any moment, you can see that was a test and the test got succeeded. This was the actual value which was coming up in here, and we were working that behind in there. So one of the examples with Microsoft Power Automate Flow is in this entire process, we haven't entered even a single line of code over here, guys. So what I'm doing next, let me click over here. I want to see this execution. And let's take a look. It executed this trigger. These were some of the inputs which are getting generated. You want to see all the output, you can download that data, giving me the JSON data, a developer-oriented JSON data, which kicks in. All right. You want to see the send email. What was the values? How does it go? You can use plain HTMLs in there. You want to download the output as well as in JSON. You can see that. So this is like a developer can also identify if something went wrong. They want to see some raw data associated over there. You can see if you want to see raw inputs over here, what these values were. I'm seeing it in the JSON format right across in there. So we can see the flows in there. Microsoft Power Automate flows, which are running up right across in here. If you take a look on the connectors, I've got plenty of connectors where we can work with up in there. If you take a look on the data sources, I've got lots of data sources in here, including the connections. So I created lots of connections already, which I was using as in this demonstration as well. Some belongs to SharePoint, some belongs to Bitly, some belongs to Dropbox, Eventbrite, Dynamics 365, Facebook, lots of connections, Instagram, Business Central, email, Stripe for payment processing. You can see that. And these connections can be utilized in any of your Power Automate trigger, and we can start having those particular details right across in there. So this was a very small example what executed in business process automated flow in here. I can talk about marketing automation. We can discuss about sales order processing, XML serializations. We can talk about some of the complex flows which people are dealing with, and my systems is automatically creating some meeting invite, sending it to the customer support ticket, automated resolutions. We can see lots of business processes which can be done in here. Important thing, you first take a look on the connector. If the connector is already available for that service, it's great. If it is not, your developers can even create custom connectors here using Postman and multiple custom connectors tools and APIs in there. And you can start using those custom functionalities as well. Of course, you have monitoring and a lot more capabilities in here. If you want to see your Cloudflow activity, what's going on with your flow executions. Today, there was some executions. Yesterday, there were some executions. There are some older executions. I'm into my monitoring workspace. If you want to see some of the machines, if you're using for on-prem data connectivities over there, if some of your services are on premises and I want to see if you have some data gateways installed, you can see how many data gateways are there which are connecting to these cloud services and sending and receiving data based on some triggers. So we can have lots of informations and details which can be processed over here when we talk about Microsoft Power Automate right across in there. It is a great solution which can help you automating your business processes irrespective of which industry they comes from, what business scenario are they presenting, how challenging those integrations are. If the connector is already available, use them. If it's not, create your custom connectors and start integrating them. Some of the important facts and figures, guys. It has drastically reduced the common integration scenarios efforts by 80 to 85%. it is a great tool even for the end users, the known developers who would like to do their integrations done in quick seconds. More importantly, for the small to mid-scale organizations to startups, where they have limited budgets and all, they cannot have a full-fledged automated softwares. They can achieve those small automations at their end without even having a great programming knowledge and get these things automated right across. So these were some of the benefits which includes with Microsoft Power Platform in here. And that was one quick thing what we were discussing on today's tightly scheduled webinar in here. This was about a quick demonstration which we had on Microsoft Power Automate in here. Now, I'm going to open the chat panel where you can have your questions being asked over there, guys. So let's go ahead. I'm going to open the chat for everybody. Let's have your questions in here and we'll take a look after that. Let me see if some of the questions which I can answer. So feel free to post your questions from your live streaming channels, from your Zoom chat, wherever you guys are joined up. Let's see if some questions coming up. All righty, great. There's a question. What is the pricing estimates you're running these flows? So that is a per user plan, and all these pricings are available at Microsoft Office 365 pricing plans, which includes Microsoft Flow, a free plan as well, and a pro, a tier ups plans as well. Okay, getting another question, which is talking about, can we do any integration from Dynamics 365 to Dynamics CRM, Finance and Operations to CRM? The answer is yes, you can always do that. Both the connectors are available in there. Just use them, define your triggers, and run the way you want. How efficiently does it work when you're connecting from Salesforce? Well, it's a great connector. It's already available. It's calling the API, REST API, and the things are near real-time functionalities and automations we are talking about. So it's working great in there. Can we reuse the connections with multiple flows? The answer is yes, we can reuse the connections with Microsoft Flows in here. We can always do that. Right, everybody, let's have your questions in here. Okay, there is a question coming up. What is the load in terms of records it can handle? For example, if you talk about my flow is running, it's processing the records in there. So it's not like 5,000, 10,000, 20,000. So essentially there is no records in terms of limit. But of course, there is a limit on the execution time if you're doing it on the free plan versus the premium plans down there. So in terms of number of records limits, it's not there. You can have as many records as you want. The longer the number of records going to be, the longer the duration the flow is going to take to process them. All right, there's a question coming up. If we have Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations, yes, we have that connector. And the connector is providing you only one trigger as of now, that is the business events. So in your Finance and Operations, your team can create the business events in HR, for procurement, for supply chain, for manufacturing, and those business events can be published. And then whenever that business event occurs, for example, your HR is creating a position, you want to get it published to LinkedIn, Facebook automatically through there. You want to process it and connect to your third-party systems down there. So first you need to register them as business events in Finance and Operations, then use that connector and connect it to any other HR systems if you want. How good this is when it comes to RPA, guys, robotic process automation. I would be quite honest in here, it is not as good as Automate Everywhere or other RPA giants are in there, but we are reaching there. We just started the RPA flows a couple of years back, and we are already so good in terms of, because we are using Selenium for any kind of automated testings and all that. So UI flows, they are great functionalities. Try to work over there. There is a question coming up. What are the major differences between Power Automate and Azure Logic Apps? So I would like to answer that, guys, though they are two different topics, but They are 95.5%, 98.5%, in fact, exactly the same. Whatever I've done over here, if you go to your Azure portal in your subscription, you can create a logic app, which is exactly doing the same thing. The major differences are, number one, the Logic app is ideally for developers who would like to write more JSON in there. They have a code view associated over there. They can work within the JSONs. The billing needs to happen in Azure subscription, some of the use cases, whereas Microsoft Power Automate is part of Microsoft 365 plans. The billing happen based on the per user subscription license. And on top of that, it is for non-developers. You don't write the codes in there, you don't work with the JSON code concepts in here. That's a flexibility which you can do on Logic apps. The second technical difference, you have plenty of connectors in there. There can be some connectors which are only supported with Microsoft Flows. They are not yet supported with Logic apps, and vice versa as well. There can be some connectors which are available in Logic apps, but they are not available in Microsoft Flow. So that's the second major difference when you talk about. So some of the differences we were discussing, these are some of the examples. How does these things actually work? All righty, perfect. So that was exactly, I've got some more questions coming up. Let's see how many of them can I address that. So do we have an option to pass with multiple test scenarios? For example, you choose to use already run data in your demo. So of course we can do that. And then of course, when you have these multiple test scenarios, if you have 200 different runs altogether, you want to go with a specific record, why it was in there. Sometimes people also does, hey, the automation was supposed to happen, but there was a glitch in the meanwhile, and somehow the record didn't create it. But I know my Power Automate flow get executed, and there was something, we rectified the error, but we cannot ask that user to enter that detail again if it's coming from a dynamic source. We don't know. Maybe it was entered 24 hours earlier. So in that case, we don't have any other choice then to test it again with the same run ID. So the runs get completed and the actual transaction gets created into the system. So we also use runs on those particular situations. All righty, perfect. So there was one quick thing we had for today's session, guys. It was really nice having all of you, such a nice audience in here. Thank you very much for joining us. Keep following us, register for the upcoming webinars, and we have some wonderful webinars coming up. Go to the website, check the upcoming webinars in there, and we'll be with you shortly with the next series of webinars in there. Thank you very much for joining us today. Have a great day ahead. Bye-bye.